The problem is, I think people don't know how to do it. It's not really trained in school either on how to do it. So I think people tend to forget. So once you become a leader, when you're working in a place, I think people always moan about their managers, maybe saying that they don't realize that they don't take into consideration the staff. And then I think once they become leaders, they forget that they're in a position where now they can influence the things, and they just kind of go ahead and maybe they're in shoes too big and they're kind of nervous about the job. And so they're very task oriented instead of understanding that they should focus on the staff first, and then the staff will focus on the tasks.
Welcome to the AttractionPros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman, founder of BackLooper. I help attractions collect guest feedback and identify top priorities needed for improvement.
And I'm Matt Heller, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting. I help leaders lead so they can increase employee engagement and retention.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the AttractionPros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing really well. In fact, I'd say I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
I'm great, and somebody has to say fantastic, I think, on every episode. I have a question for you.
What's the question?
Who has been your best boss?
My best boss. Well, when I think back on my career and any job that I've had, one of them that comes to mind was my boss at Universal when I worked in guest services. She was the head of guest services, and I learned so much from her. In fact, I would say anything related to, complaint resolution or, providing great guest service and how it fits in with the entire organization. I think a lot of it can be traced back to my boss when I was at Universal on the guest communications team.
Okay. So do you want to know why I'm asking?
I do, but I'm curious as far as who your favorite or best boss was as well.
So I would say that, I've had a couple of good ones. I've had a couple of stinkers too, which I think is, we all have. But the one that typically comes to mind is a gentleman named Dave Vosepka, and he was my boss at Valley Fair. And he was really good at not only kind of keeping us kind of reined in. We had kind of a group of managers that we loved to goof around and things like that. So he was good at keeping us reined in, but he was also really good at pointing out when we could do better. And I think that was something that I really took away. One of the things he used to always do is, we'd be in a meeting and we'd be complaining about some other department, what they did. And he's like, okay, I understand maybe they're not perfect, but we're not perfect either. What did we do that may have influenced that decision from them? Or how could we be better? So he was always bringing it back to us and not allowing us to play the blame game with other people. So I really appreciated that from him.
I think that's a really good reason to have a favorite boss. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm guessing this is going to tie in somehow to our interview and our topic today, but I'm still at a loss where we're going.
We've done enough of these. I think you can figure out that, yes, this does tie into our guest today. Pia Adlivanken from Linnenmaki in Finland is someone who, as I read about her in Fun World, as I saw some presentations she's done, she's someone I would love to work for, and we've had a lot of really great leaders on this podcast and a lot of people I would love to work for. Her people first philosophy is something that really resonates with me, and how she talks about, culture change and building trust and building relationships and some of the scary things that leaders have to go through in order to develop as good leaders. So I'm really excited to be able to bring this interview to our listeners.
Do you think we should ask her to be the CEO of AttractionPros?
Well, that would mean she'd be the CEO of us too, right?
And we'd be working for her.
That's right.
She'd be our boss.
That'd be kind of fun.
This was a phenomenal conversation, and one of them that I feel like we could have just gone on and talked for hours, because she shared so much, both from a a conceptual, I would say, philosophical standpoint from leadership, but we really get tactical in this conversation as well. So this is one of those that, maybe grab a notepad, because I feel like there's just going to be a lot of things that come from this that you can implement not only into your mindset and kind of the way that you operate, but also some very specific takeaways that you can implement today with your team and with your staff and within your organization.
One of the things that she really talks about is how a leader should spend their time, like where they should emphasize their time, knowing that sometimes it's not going to work out perfectly that way. But it really gives a great roadmap or a guide as how we should be spending our time, because I know a lot of people struggle with time management. But I think part of that is we don't have a guide or a goal of how we should be spending our time, not just, I got to get through my email inbox, that kind of thing.
Right.
So I will let her expand on that, but that's really something that I think is a great message.
Yeah, I was going to say time management is one thing we could probably talk for hours on, which I guess is kind of counterintuitive to that, right? Time is our one non-renewable resource,
That's
so,
right.
But with that said, we'd like to make the best of your time, our listeners and our audience. So I would say let's get to this incredible interview with Pia Adlivanken.
Pia Adlivanken, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. This is the Attraction Pros podcast, and you are CEO of Linnenmaki in Finland. Thank you so much again for joining us. How are you doing today, Pia?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure, our pleasure. Can you first tell us a little bit about your background?
Absolutely. Even though I live in Helsinki, Finland, I have quite an international background. I was born in New York. So I've lived about 9 years of my life in the States. I've lived 3 years in Sweden. I've lived a few years in Germany. So I've been moving back and forth. So that's kind of, we moved a lot due to my dad's job. And then after that, I got kind of the travel bug in me, and I've been doing a lot of traveling after that as well. I have a hospitality management degree, both from Finland. And then I continued with my studies at Cornell University, upstate New York. So I was there for a few years. And my dream was always to work in a 5-star property. I wanted to be a 5-star hotel chain director. So I thought, like, the more service, the better service you gave, the more inspiring I found that. And thus I worked in many different hotel chains around the world in hospitality management. And I found that quite interesting. But what really disillusioned me, I guess, at some point was the fact that whereas you wanted the perfect service, and I was very inspired by providing good service, the staff in the back of house was not treated the same. So while you were kind of kicked in the head behind the house, and then they told you to smile when you went out with the customers. And I kind of started thinking that it doesn't have to be like that. Why could we not treat people right back of seat and then make sure that they wanted to smile big front of house? And so I went out of my way to find a place where I could test my ideas. And I found this little Manor Spa hotel in Finland, a very small place. Nobody had ever heard about it pretty much. And I went out to really build the culture and try a lot of different ways of doing things. And in the end, we were the first hospitality management provider in Finland that ever was able to come on the Great Place to Work list that we had in Finland. So I guess we did something right. So
yeah, why do you think it is that that even in 5-star luxury, hotels and resorts, that there is this mindset that the 5-star experience is only the front of house experience, whereas a lot of leadership philosophies that we've talked about here and previous guests have talked about, and that Matt talks about all the time, is focusing on the employee engagement standpoint, and whether it's servant leadership or working for your employees, that will translate over to guests, and that the back of house experience for your staff should be just as high of a standard, if not even higher. So curious why, from your experience working, in both, the theme park side of it and the hotel side of it, why you think that there might be that disconnect, potentially in other industries and probably a little bit in places in our industry as well.
I think, leaders or managers in this case tend to forget about the importance of putting the effort on the staff. So you kind of think, I think the old-fashioned way of thinking is to say, okay, you should be happy that you have a job, you get a salary and do the job, and then you have to be a very professional way of doing it. And kind of the soft side of it, how you feel, how people feel at work, doesn't seem that important. Obviously, this was 30 years ago when I think that was more prevalent. I think nowadays everybody understands that you have to actually make sure that your staff feels good at work so that they provide better service. The problem is I think people don't know how to do it. It's not really trained in school either on how to do it. So I think people tend to forget. So once you become a leader, when you're working in a place, I think people always moan about their managers, maybe saying that they don't realize that they don't take into consideration the staff. And then I think once they become leaders, they forget that they're in a position where now they can influence the things, and they just kind of go ahead and maybe they're in shoes too big and they're kind of nervous about the job, and so they're very task oriented instead of understanding that they should focus on the staff first, and then the staff will focus on the tasks.
So Pia, I'm curious, just to kind of follow that path a little bit, talking about someone in a new leadership role, if their shoes are too big, right? What are some things that you can do to coach them or get them to see, that their job is really to develop other leaders and to develop their staff? Like, how do you get that message across to them?
I think it's important. I think, first of all, I think this should be trained in hospitality schools. I'm sure they do nowadays too. In my time, not so much. I think at the same time also is to remind everyone who's a new leader is to really analyze of what they think is good leadership, and then go back and see in how many of these features tick off and say, how many of these factors do you think people talk about you and what would they feel? I believe my biggest experience was I was in a 5-star property in New Jersey, actually, years ago, and this was I got my first really good management position where I had people working for me, and I was running around like crazy, doing 60, 70-hour weeks, managing the task. And all of a sudden I realized when I was wondering why the staff was not doing what I expected them to do, all of a sudden I realized that I actually did not lead them. I was managing them. And I realized little me, who had these big shoes on, actually was the direct supervisor of these people. And I didn't realize that I kind of forgot it in the way. And so I started taking the time to drink coffee with the people and sitting with them in their break room. They were not happy seeing me sitting in the break room. They're just like, why is she here? But I kept at it, and slowly and surely I kind of won the trust. I started asking about their opinions. I started asking what they thought I should do. I quickly found out who the opinion maker was, kind of opinion leader in the group. And once I won the trust, I had no issues with any of the tasks anymore. So this was a really big wake-up call for me as well. And when I analyzed it afterwards, I forgot. I didn't realize that I was the direct leader. I was just managing the task because on my job sheet, it said manage these tasks. Mm-hmm. So I think that might be one point why people forget.
What would be some of the best ways to really define the differences and the separation between leadership and management, but also knowing that leaders and managers need to balance both of them? So where does that come into play as far as kind of making sure that you're not just managing, that you are leading, but also making sure that the tasks are also being managed at the same time? Mm-hmm.
Well, the way we built it up at Linnenmaki is actually, we have this management model that we've done. It's in the shape of a circle, and we manage the time, or actually divided the time between the parts that we think managers or leaders should spend their time on. And we say 50% of the time that they use should be done on leadership. And we say leadership because you have to manage the individual and you have to manage the team. And then after that, of course, you have your operational work, but that can be only about 25% of your work time. And then you still have to have one segment of your time constantly to develop yourself and the park. Because we're saying also that an amusement park doesn't develop itself. So the only way to develop things is for people to develop it. And if they never have the time to actually develop, and take the time to develop themselves and develop the park, then nothing changes. So we've actually made a model of saying, this is how you should spend your time. Of course, every day doesn't work like that. And in our leadership model, we also have this segment we call the robber sector, which means that however well you plan your day, there may be instances that happen which rob the time, where you have to spend time on putting out fires. But the big, I think the big realization is that when I ask my staff in the park, for example, how has your day been? They'll tell me, oh, Pia, do you know, this was a robber segment day today. We had all these issues, I had to put out fires, but tomorrow I go back to doing what I'm supposed to be doing. So people realizing that every day cannot be spent putting out fires, because then you never have time to really lead or manage anything. So I think we actually make a model of it and saying it's important. And leadership is also drinking coffee with your team. It's knowing your team, it's spending time with them. So it's not just doing appraisals and having meetings with them. It's all the informal parts that are also actually the important part of leading, because that's when you build trust. And when you build trust, then you get trust. And once you get the trust, then I think the tasks get managed.
And I love that. I love the breakdown of time, because, you know, so many people say, I need to manage my time better, but they don't really have a goal, you know, saying this is how I should be using my time. Yes, I want to get through my emails and I want to get through my performance reviews and get the tasks done. But, you know, it's hard to say where I should be managing my time. So I also like the concept of the time robbers, right? We all know that there's lots of those in our days, and putting out fires. So again, I'm kind of curious, when you have people that are new to that leadership role, and you're saying that you should have coffee with people, well, that can be kind of intimidating. I don't know what these people are going to say, right? Or you just go talk to them. In the informal part of leadership, which I agree is so important, because it does build trust. But how do you get them comfortable and out of their own comfort zone a little bit, knowing that if I sit down with coffee, they may complain about me. They may have things, they may say things I don't know how to handle. So how do you get them comfortable with that scenario?
Well, I think partly it's leading by example. I have coffee in the park every second weeks, where we have a day where anybody in the park can come and have coffee with me. I also always participate in the weekly our seasonal manager staff meetings, where I ask them, what can I do better? And sometimes I get the question asked, like, what if they say something scary? And I said, if they don't tell me what they think, it doesn't mean that they don't think it. They still think it, but I can do absolutely nothing about it. I'd rather know even the worst things than not know and have them talk about it behind my back. So I kind of lead by example. And this is what I tell everybody: ask, because you rather know than not know, because it doesn't change what people think. So I think this is part of it. I think leading by example, providing opportunities to practice. In our seasonal managers workshops, we actually practice of giving feedback. How does it feel to give feedback? How does it feel to give constructive feedback? What does that mean to give constructive rather than critical feedback? And we teach them. And we have a lot of young seasonal managers, but all at the same time also our permanent managers or leaders. It's important that we teach them first, so they can then in turn teach the seasonal leaders.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because it sounds like there's this very proactive approach to not just wanting to receive feedback for how leaders can develop or how the operation can improve, but also training frontline staff or training any employees on the best way to actually give feedback. Can you walk us through a little bit of that? Because that is immensely helpful, because like you said, if just because they're not sharing the feedback doesn't mean that they're not thinking it, and it's, you know, not affecting their job satisfaction. And obviously it can be terrifying for a leader to maybe walk into those situations of wanting to, you know, have coffee with their team and wanting to ask for that feedback, not knowing, you know, what lion's den they might be walking into. But now setting up those who are providing the feedback with the tools and the abilities to make sure that it's able to be communicated across effectively. Just wonder if you could expand a little more on that as well.
Well, since we have a lot of young leaders in the park, most of them are in their first leadership position. We've made a model of pretty much everything. And what's important for us as well is not just to make it a model that's simple to understand, but also then to have the guidelines behind it. And then also we spend a lot of effort on making sure that it's drawn out in a fun way. So it's not just text on a piece of paper, but it's all drawn out in our own personal style. and we conceptualize all these things. So we have the leadership wheel of innovation that we call with the management leadership circle. We break it down into smaller segments, and then we practice. So that's something that we do. Also, we have this customer service concept. We're all fun masters. We're masters at creating fun. It's very important that we don't have titles and we don't have hierarchy. And in the fun master concept that we have, also then when we do the appraisal discussions in the park, it's always based on the fun master concept. It's a customer service concept. So then we ask, well, how do you think you succeed in doing these things that we've taught you? And then you can tell first how you think you've succeeded, and then your leader gives you feedback on what you could still go and improve upon. So it's conceptualized, which makes it easy, but it's always important that the persons themselves appraise themselves first. So it's not just top down, but it's always a discussion. And this is part of what we do.
Right, and that self-reflection is often very, very important and actually really insightful too, right? Mm-hmm. So I love that that moniker, Fun Master. You know, I love that. But I also heard you say recently that not everybody is a fun master. Not everybody is cut out to be a Linnenmaki fun master. So can you expand on that a little bit, like what you're looking for when you're hiring?
Yes, it's very important. If you say that you want people to be a certain kind, you have to obviously know what it is you're looking for. For us, we're looking at team players. We're looking at, because what we really think is for the park to be successful, we need everyone, and everyone is equally important. That's why even our organizational chart is not a chart, it's a heart-shaped park that involves everyone equally. And so it's very important to look for team players that want to be part of the solution, want to help their peers to be successful as well. We want people to have good interpersonal skills, obviously, which is really important in customer service, but also in being a good team member. We think it's really, really important that people take the initiative, that they have the self-confidence to learn. Obviously, they don't have to have the skills, but they have to have the confidence to want to try new things and take the initiative. And we want them to be strongly present. We want them to be throwing themselves out there in a sense where if you're hosting a game, for example, and you're behind a microphone, obviously have to kind of try to give something of yourself. And that's why, for example, for the games, we recruit staff members that are, for example, aspiring actresses and actors, you know, so they can try it out first. And so, but the interpersonal skills, the team players are really important, and people who want to take responsibility, who are willing to learn. One way that we recruit people is that we have them complete team tasks. So when we ask people to come for interviews, we have Lego bricks, and we ask them as a team to build an innovative amusement ride. And they have 20 minutes. And of course, we're not looking at who builds the best ride. What we're looking for is who takes initiative, who takes other people's opinions into consideration, who makes sure that everyone is included, who's maybe quiet and just sits back and lets everybody else do the work. In a few minutes, it's really easy to see who are our fun masters.
Yeah. I like that Lego brick exercise. I've used that as well in team building and job assessments, but it was also at Legoland. So it was obviously great to see that, you know, that it's not just exclusive to you know, to the Lego brand or a Lego park. So curious, as far as, you know, those skills that you're looking for, that you know, many of them, as you mentioned, are learnable or trainable, and then there's some that they kind of have to bring to the table with them. Mm-hmm. And, you know, a lot of times that might not necessarily present itself immediately in a job interview or those, you know, assessment or team building type of activities. So curious as far as kind of the best ways to look beyond a skill that someone might not have, but want to bring them on anyway, because there's that potential to be able to develop that.
I think it's the attitude is the most important factor, obviously, is saying, I don't know this, but I want to learn. So that's already a big positive check, you know, and then they say, okay, they've done something. I think if you have a 20-year-old applying for a job, have they done something? Obviously, they haven't been in a managerial position, but have they been at a camp counselor? Have they sold ice cream? Have they delivered mail? You know, whatever. Have they taken the initiative to do something? I see when I have two daughters, and when they started working early, I wanted them to work since they were 15. And they said, even when they were 20 in their class in college, they were pretty much the only ones that had summer jobs, because people say, oh, I want to go to the beach, and I don't feel, I live at home, so my parents pay for everything, I don't have to work. And I think you're doing a disservice for your children if you're not requiring them to go out there and learning about working and taking responsibility. So this is what we're looking for. Have they done something at least? They don't have to have done the same thing. Also, in terms of our supervisors in the park, we never recruit supervisors directly from the outside. It's always somebody who grows into the role. So before you can be a supervisor, you're usually done about 2 seasons, 3 seasons in the park doing the operational work. So then you know what you're leading. And also these are the people, are seasonal supervisors who have grown in the park. They're the ones that do the recruiting. So they know what type of skills you need in their particular department to make sure that people are successful. But I would say the attitude is the most important part. And also then a little bit to be able to show that you've taken the initiative to do something before you apply for this particular job.
Yeah, Pia, I loved what you were saying about, looking for people that already have that skill set, like an actress or something like that. And one gentleman I worked with a number of years ago, he worked, he was the head of a games department. He said he looked for people that were in the debate club, because they were already comfortable talking to people. He said, I don't want you to debate while you're at work, but you're already comfortable putting yourself out there and being in front of people. So I love that concept. One other thing I'd like to kind of pick your brain on a little bit is you have also talked about the difference between treating people the same and actually being fair. And that's something I think that people kind of get mixed up a little bit. Like, you want to treat everybody, the thought is, let's treat everybody the same so that they have the same output, but that's actually not being fair. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that.
Yes, I think it's really important to treat people fairly. I mean, that's the first concept, because if you treat people unfairly, I think you lose trust. And when you lose trust, everything else that you build after that is pointless. But treat people fairly, I think, is for making sure that everybody can succeed in their job. So it's not treating everybody necessarily the same. It means that some people need a little extra support. Some people need some extra guidance. Some people are very independent. They don't want you to be there looking over their shoulder all the time. So this goes back to the management or the leadership style that we have, is knowing your team. So you have to know what the strengths and weaknesses are of your team members so you can support them in the right way. I think it's okay to treat people differently, not unfairly, but differently, as long as you explain why. So we have a lot of people in a park, for example, that are impaired staff members, and we want them to be able to be successful in their jobs. So we tell people, okay, these people have maybe shorter working days, they have longer breaks, they have a little bit lighter chores, but we want them to be successful, and we want you to help them be successful. And everybody goes, oh yeah, oh, of course. And then they go out of their way to make sure that somebody else who may have a little bit more problems of doing a certain job, to teach them and train them and feel important about that as well. But I think communication about why you treat people differently is more important than doing it, so you have to explain why. And obviously people are smart. They understand when you explain. And then also, of course, if they disagree, then of course they can also question you, and you have to be able to answer it. And sometimes you may say, okay, sorry, yes, you're right. This was unfair. I didn't treat everybody right, and I didn't realize, and then you go out of your way to correct it. So that's also okay. You can make mistakes. That's part of our concept as well. Make mistakes, because that's how you learn, but always own up to the mistakes, and if you can, share them so people don't have to make the same mistakes over and over. And people have been really good about that lately. The way I get people to admit to their mistakes, I think it's really important that I start with doing that myself. I have apologized to my staff a few times in front of like a monthly meeting where I said, I tried and this wasn't a good idea. I made a mistake, or I'm sorry, I didn't explain this well enough, or whatever. I apologize and ask for their forgiveness, and they say fine. And then we move on, and then I never hear about it again. But, so I think it's important that you own up to your mistakes, and at the same time then encourage people to own up to their mistakes and saying it's okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn.
Yeah. And you've been talking a lot about trust, which I really appreciate. And, I think if you're not admitting the mistakes, like you said, people are smart, they're going to notice it, and that's going to erode your trust, because they're going to say, well, she didn't own up to that. We know there's something going on behind the scenes. We're not really sure what it is, but that really, hurts the trust that we have.
Yeah, and also though, people have to be worthy of the trust. So I've told my staff that I tell you also, we have a lot of issues that we share, and I'm very honest and open, but I've told my staff, if I hear that this leaks out, I will stop doing it. And one of you can spoil it for everybody else. And then we had an issue where I told some things to our seasonal staff, especially with the corona. We made a lot of changes and many different alterations. And I told them something and I asked them not to tell anybody. And then of course it leaked out. And so I put it out in we have like this internal chat. And I actually wrote in there, I said, I'm really disappointed now because one person did this. I cannot trust you again. Next time you hear it, after the press hears it. And I got most positive thumbs up comment from my critical comment. Because people, the ones that did not break the trust, they appreciated that I actually lifted it out in the open and actually then scolded the ones that did it to make them understand that it was unfair to everybody else.
Yeah.
So also then, of course, people have to be worthy of the trust, as we as managers and leaders, but also the staff has to be worthy of it, and it needs to be understood. You get as much as you deserve, in a sense, both ways.
Right. It's a two-way street.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned changes that you made, with the 2020 season. I think that's kind of a good segue to talk, a little bit about kind of what the season looked like for you. You mentioned that you opened later than expected, closed a little earlier than expected. Can you talk just a little bit about, just some of the overarching changes that guests and employees experienced at the park this summer?
Well, I think one big issue, of course, was we opened 7 weeks late. First, we didn't know if we were allowed to open at all, and then we didn't know if when we were going to be able to open. So to be on constant kind of standby, that we may open in 2 weeks, we may open in 4 weeks, we may not open at all. So we had a lot of scenarios where we had to calculate out all the different plans, and of course, then during the spring, before we could open, is to communicate to everyone. By the time the COVID turned around, we had already signed contracts with 600 seasonal staff members, as well as then we have 70 permanent staff members, and everybody was looking to have answers, and none of us knew what was going to happen. So the really important point and learning is communication, communication, communication. So we would have with our permanent staff, we would have every Friday, we would have a weekly meeting where I would tell them what I knew so far. Sometimes I couldn't tell them anything new, but at least every time I asked, is there any news that you want to know? Is there anything you are wondering? What can we do? But also for the seasonal staff, we kept sending out information to them saying, okay, as it looks now, we cannot open next week or we cannot open next month. And with the seasonal managers, we had separate meetings for them. So I think constant communication was really important. And by the time we were finally able to open, we had made many different types of plans. And by the time we opened, we just took plan number C and we went ahead with it. And I'm really proud of my team for being so flexible and being able to open on time. And another obviously big issue was not just to be able to open, was of course, how can we do it safely? How can we guarantee the health and safety of all the customers, of all our staff, all the different issues. We did excellent cooperation in Finland between all the amusement parks that normally we see as our competitors. We have 4 big amusement parks in Finland. So we regularly had Teams meeting where we shared all the ideas that each park had in preparing for opening. Also, I think IAPA provided great opportunities to share ideas. And I think the workplace that we've had also been able to put ideas out, and people sharing has been really important. The issues that we did, or the preparations we did for opening up in a safe and secure way, I'm really, really proud to say that for the whole season at Linnenmaki, but as well in Finland, not one person or not one COVID case can be traced back to the amusement parks. So we did obviously a lot of things preparing for that. Also for our staff members, not one staff member caught the virus in the park. So we're really, really proud of that. But obviously there are a lot of challenges for next year again, because we have no idea what it's going to look like.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I saw somewhere that actually in 2020, you had some pretty high funmaster and guest satisfaction scores, which might be counterintuitive to all the different changes and challenges that you've had. So how do you account for the higher satisfaction ratings for those groups?
Well, there's a saying in Finnish that says that in times of difficulties is when you really see who your friend is. And I think this is what the COVID has shown us. Who are the ones that you really trust? And also in terms of at Linnenmaki, we've been building the culture for 6 years now. And we talk a lot about people first. But now, as we had the biggest crisis ever in our park, of course, now was the time to prove that what we've said is actually true. So instead of furloughing people right away, instead of just putting everybody out and not telling people what we were aiming to do, or counteractively, what we were able to do is build trust even though the times were difficult. So we were making sure that people had their jobs. We were making sure that people knew what was happening. We kept sharing. We kept trying together to come up with new ways of doing things. So I think we earned the trust of our staff, or I know we did, and we got really good feedback. So when we asked them then how well did we perform with all the preparations, we got a score of over 90% out of 100. And of course, then since staff was satisfied and happy about the way things had been done, and we had shown them that we really care about them even when the times are tough, then they went out and gave excellent customer service. And that's, of course, everybody who works at Linnenmaki knows that that's what we understand is the biggest issue for us, is to give exceptional customer service, because that's how we get customers to return. And when they return is when park is successful. So they rewarded us, I think, we've never had as good a service. We got so many positive feedback from our customers, spontaneous, that they actually sent emails to me personally saying, this and this person gave this exceptional service. I've never seen anything like it. Everybody's so happy and great at the park. And that was the atmosphere. We've never had as good an atmosphere in the park as last season, in terms of service, in terms of our staff just being happy to have a job, and also understanding that it's all about making sure that we exceeded customer expectations. So I think really it's not even surprising. I think it's kind of follows from when you build the culture and you do the things that you promise that you're going to do, people are happy and they reward you.
That's amazing. That's fantastic to just hear stories like that. Definitely a breath of fresh air compared to a lot of the other news that, that we've been hearing over the last several months, and throughout the course of the summer. And I really like that saying of, what you said, when times get tough, you find out who your friends are. And I think that really shows true just, with the staff demonstrating their loyalty. Did you notice that with guests as well, that the people who are coming, that they are demonstrating their loyalty to the park, and they're saying, hey, even though it's a strange summer, a lot of people aren't traveling, a lot of people aren't going to parks or doing any, tourism or recreational activity, were the guests kind of showing that loyalty as well? And, if you have any examples to share from that standpoint too.
I think so. We had to restrict the amount of guests that we could take in the park. Normally we would have, on a good summer day, we have about 15,000 people in the park. And now we put we restricted ourselves. It wasn't our government, didn't require us to restrict the attendance, but we did. So we put the maximum amount to 7,000. And we're a free entrance park, so people can come and go as they please. They don't have to pay an entrance fee. And this time, because we didn't know how many people were going to come, so we required that people would book their ticket in advance. They didn't have to pay for the ticket, but they had to register beforehand. But if they wanted to make sure that they absolutely would get into the park, then we sold pre-tickets, and then we guaranteed that with a pre-bought tickets for a certain day, they would actually get in. And people were really, really flexible with the system. So it was really nice to see that people were not complaining about having to pay necessarily an entrance fee. At the same time, we wanted, all the other parks in Finland also changed the system so everybody had to pay, because they said, okay, only the people that pay, we want them to come in because we have to restrict the amount of customers. For us to be loyal to the concept and the strategy that we've always had, that we allowed people who may not have as many funds to come in for free, these people made sure they came early in the morning. So we would actually have the park pretty full already for the first few hours, which for us was great because then of course they spent more time in the park and maybe bought more things. But when we every day in the park, we also asked for guest satisfaction. We do the questions in the park every day, and our customer loyalty numbers were higher than ever. And also we asked specifically, how well do you think we provided in terms of the safety and health issues? And we got very, very high scores on those. Customer service was obviously greater than ever. Partly though, because we weren't as full, because we realized the better summers we have, the more people we have in the park, the lower the customer satisfaction numbers, because then you have to stand in lines. There are a lot of people. So now that we had about 7,000 people in the park, then of course you didn't have any lines, and so people were satisfied about that as well. But I think in all the issues, you can have a great park, you can have beautiful flowers, you can have great rides and good hamburgers, but if the service is not good, it kind of defines the whole park attitude, and you're not happy with the day if you get bad service. Even for one person, even if you get good service from 10 people, then one person is rude to you, that kind of reflects on your whole day. And now that we had exceptionally good customer service, that reflection, I think, showed also in the customer satisfaction numbers.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a way to measure this specifically, but I know from my own experience, when I get good service, like the roller coasters are more fun. The burger tastes better, and just all those experiences are lifted when you're having that great customer experience. So I absolutely see where that can happen. So what are some of the lessons that you've learned in 2021 or 2020 that you're going to take into 2021? Maybe it is that lower capacity or, other things you've done for your staff. What are some of those things you can take into 2021?
I think one important thing is, of course, to have many different plans for next year. We have a lot of different scenarios, we can't take for granted that we can open end of April. So obviously what we have to do is make sure that our employment contracts are flexible. So that's something we have to do, although now going into the next year, obviously making sure that we wouldn't have to furlough, but at the same time, we don't also guarantee a start of the employment contract at a certain day without knowing if the park is open. So that's something concrete, but at the same time, I think also in terms of the systems that we built up with the pre-booking ticket system that we had planned many years to do that we hadn't done. So of course, we're going to continue to develop that one. We still have to keep making sure that the health and safety issues are taken into consideration. So there were a lot of procedures that we put into place, which of course we will continue doing next year. Also, we did a lot of things for staff health and safety measures, where we had extra staff dining halls, and we had people coming in at different times instead of everybody's shift starting at the same time, so they weren't all in the dressing rooms at the same time. All these things we're going to take away. What I really appreciated, and I told my staff as well, was the flexibility to understanding. And now when we're planning next year, we end every sentence with saying, if nothing else changes, so we know that it's not cut in stone. So we're looking at the opening hours, we're looking at the opening days, we're looking at all the new investments that we're going to do. But at the same time, we know that anything can happen to change it. So we're not really set. Nothing is set in stone, let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And I think one thing that we really want to continue is, of course, the communication within the parks in Finland, obviously, but also with all the parks. I think we have a lot to learn, and we should share as much as we can with everyone so we can all be successful, because the stronger we are as an industry, the better we are at attracting customers to come to our properties, because of course the whole industry is seen still as one. So I think that's important. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And when talking about that flexibility and the importance of that communication with your team, and would you say ending every sentence with, if nothing else changes, now I kind of also think of this from the guest side of it, that there's probably a lot that needs to be communicated, whether it's from a marketing aspect or a guest communication standpoint, which can probably be a little bit tougher to manage expectations. Or just overall, sharing, whether it's park hours or opening dates or, restrictions or policies or capacity or anything like that. curious how that translates to the guest side of it to avoid any misaligned expectations, maybe from guests who visited in 2020 and it's going to be different in 2021, or who visited in 2019 and didn't come in 2020 and are now, you know, coming into an entirely new atmosphere compared to pre-COVID.
That's true. We're in a lucky position, sometimes unlucky, but mostly lucky position in Finland, that Linnenmaki Amusement Park, since it's the biggest tourist attraction in Finland and also the biggest amusement park, anything and everything we do is of interest to the press. And we were able to build we've always had a really good relationship with the press, but I think this year even better than ever, where they wrote a lot about the positive things that we were doing in the park, and they came and visited in the park, and we were able to convince them that we were actually really serious about the health and safety of our customers. So they wrote a lot of positive articles, and of course we're going to continue doing that. Going into next year, communicating about the fact that there were no COVID contaminations or exposures to the virus in amusement parks anywhere. I think I asked Jakob Baal, also this IAPA EMEA director, and he said he doesn't know of any in all of Europe. So I think this is something that we should build upon and advertise next year, that doing some fun things in an outdoor amusement park, it's actually safe, because we have all these procedures in place, and we now have one good track record year behind us saying that it can be done. Obviously, it's very important for us not to get lazy about it and make sure that we continue with it and continue improving it. But I think it's important to tell the customers what we're experiencing, and also tell them if there are issues that we're not sure about. I think one of the reasons why we actually decided to end our season early is that the new outbreak of the coronavirus, the second wave, hit us as well at the end of August. And October, which usually our season ends with the Carnival of Light, where we have more people per day in the park than we have in July on our best days, because it's very, very popular event. We did not want to do the risk this year of, at the point where the virus is spreading again, to attracting people, 7,000 people per day to the park, because we did not want to lose that trust that we had already built this season. So we didn't want to risk it. So that's one of the reasons we decided not to keep the park open.
Yeah.
So also by that, we want to show our customers that we take their health seriously. So it's not all about just making sure that we get the money in October. It's for us, we lost a lot of money by closing the park, but at the same time, we wanted to keep the trust.
Yeah, and that really goes with your people first philosophy, right? It's whether it's the team members or the guest, the fun masters or the guest, it is all about the people and keeping them safe. One thing I'm curious of, you talked about how the culture has really helped sustain you through the pandemic. If we could go back to when you first got to Linnenmaki, were there people that were not on board with your people first philosophy, and how did you either get them on board or change direction so that you did get people to buy into that vision?
I would say 99.9% were not on board. So
Wow.
I'm the first female ever in Finland ever to be a managing director or CEO of an amusement park. So it's not been a very, it's been a quite hierarchical organization, I dare to say. With all the love to my predecessors and colleagues in Finland. At the same time, also, my background was in hotels, and the last job that I had was a manor spa in the middle of nowhere, this small place that people never heard of, that where we built the culture and managed to get it on the Great Place to Work list. But it was still a manor spa, a small place. And then you take me, a woman, coming into an amusement park, absolutely no experience in an amusement world, and also then hotel background, but the last job was in a small manor spa, not even a big hotel chain that people would know. So I was kind of a black horse anyway when they took me in. And then I start talking about culture. I talk about all this soft and fluffy, and that we have to give more power to the people and let them make decisions. And people were just looking at me saying, whoa, this woman is crazy. And I could see that. I think one important thing when you start changing the culture is be patient. It takes forever. It takes 2 to 3 years to actually get people on board. What I started doing first was I got to know all my permanent staff. I invited them for an hour-long interview or have a coffee with me, and I just asked them, what expectations do you have of me? What do you want me to do? So obviously I became aware of a lot of the issues that were underlying, because all of a sudden some of the things started repeating itself. People are talking about the same type of issues. A lot of it had to do with culture. Also then for the first summer, I worked in all the different positions in the park. So I was selling ice cream, and I went on a maintenance tour, and I was on the games, and at the same time then learning about all the different parts of the park. People were really cautious when I came into a certain, for example, concession stand. But people tend to forget, if I wore the same clothes, I made myself, obviously being in a concession stand, for example, selling ice cream, I had worked in F&B my whole career. So I was able to do a hamburger maybe, but I made myself maybe a little bit dumber than needed to be, and asked for a lot of advice. And while they started showing me how to do the job, they were really strong in doing that. Then they kind of didn't feel that I had the upper hand. And then once I started asking the right questions, I got so many good answers about what was wrong and what was right and what should be done. And people just started talking, and all these things. I obviously didn't take notes when I talked to people, but at the end of each day, I wrote a lot of notes to myself. And then I put together this strategy, this culture changing group. And I selected opinion leaders that I had already then, for the first few months, realized that were the ones maybe that were most outspoken about not being very happy with me maybe, or question some things, maybe not to my face, but I heard about things. And so I asked them all to come in this culture changing team. And they were not excited. I had to kind of force them to come, so to say. And but then they got excited, because I asked them, okay, what should the strategy be? How would you develop the park if you could decide whatever you wanted to do? What would you do? And all of a sudden they started getting excited. And once they got excited, we would have these monthly meetings with the whole staff. I would have them explain the things that we were thinking about. So it wasn't me, it was them. And when you have these opinion leaders, again, sharing their ideas, being excited about new things, everybody else started to get excited. So then we did another round where I asked people to come, and already I was able to then get 20 people involved. Next year we got 40 people involved. And now this last year, when I asked who wants to be involved with changing our strategy, I had 69 people involved. So people show that they can actually influence the things that we do in the park. So you kind of have to build the trust again, with just making sure that people can participate, and that you ask the questions of what's important to them, and then also start making, very quickly, you have to start making small changes. So one concrete example was that we would have, when the park was closed, we would have just the managing director and 2 other people that could park in the park by our office building, and everybody else parked further away. And of course, I changed that right away. I said, everybody parks in the same place. It's not like I have a special parking place closer to the office building. Everybody parks in the same way. So showing people that actually I felt that we were all equal. But you have to start doing it right away. So while you do the big projects, it's important that you do all the small things at the same time, so people see that changes are happening. And slowly and surely you start building trust. And then really important, what really made it for me was that we had successful years. We put more emphasis on the staff started getting better service, the service got better, and people came back. And all of a sudden we were making money, better money, and that made people return. And then they say, okay, after 2 years, maybe, first year when we actually exceeded all our expectations in a budget, people said, oh, that's a fluke, and it's just based on what people had done before. The next year people said, okay, wow, maybe there's something in it. The third year again, they say, okay, now I'm buying it, this may be a good idea. So, but it takes time. That was a long answer.
No, that was, we really appreciate that thoroughness of that response. I started kind of thinking of follow-up questions in my head, and then I think you
forgot all
pretty
of them.
much checked. No, I think you checked them all off. You said it takes, 2 to 3 years to change a culture, and it requires patience. But clearly it requires a lot of persistence as well, because you talked about just all those small changes that you're making kind of maybe in the shadows of these larger projects, or maybe the larger projects are in the shadows of the things that are more, quickly visible. So curious, as far as, you talked about, guest satisfaction or revenue being maybe some benchmarks, or maybe KPIs that are put in place. how do you know when you're there? How do you know when you're done? Or are you done? You know, what happens after 2 to 3 years? Do you say, okay, it's been 3 years, the culture has changed, you know, do we celebrate it? Or it sounds like there's a continually moving goalpost, because it probably is something that can't plateau. It's probably something that doesn't have an actual ceiling to it. So curious as far as what happens after that 2 to 3 years where you say, I came to change the culture, or what do you know, or how do you know that you are there but still going, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's a good question. I think you're never there. I think if I said after 2 or 3 years, the culture was changed to the point where people actually started going with me. They weren't just following, we were walking together towards. That's when it starts, because that's when you get all these people excited about doing things differently. And then all of a sudden, it's not just me pulling everybody along, it's everybody doing it. So anything and everything they do, they come up with ideas of how it could be done better, and how we make sure that we influence the staff, and thinking of ways of how to ask the people what they want to do and how getting them involved. So I think it never ends. It's a constant battle of because the world changes around us. So now we think, okay, now we have a great culture. Well, people change, expectations change, the new generation's expectations change. So the culture, I think, is something that you develop constantly, because it's not developing a culture to some point and now it's great. I think it takes 2 to 3 years to earn the trust that people want to keep developing the culture with you. So I think it's never done. It's a constant battle. It's a constant making, but then you start every development process, and every cycle that we start each year goes back to, it starts on a different level. And one excellent idea, I think, which I forgot to mention, which was, and this may be something that somebody else could use, one of the bigger things I did the first year, with the first season that I planned myself. I started in the middle of season 2014, but then obviously that was already planned. So season 2015, where we then came out with this new concept of new culture, what we did was in previously in the park, if a guest was unhappy and maybe they said that I don't like my French fries, and then they go up to our funmaster, then the funmaster could not give another set of new French fries. They would have to call their supervisor, and then the supervisor would deal with the issue. What I said, this is bogus, everybody needs to take responsibility. So I gave every person 5 coupons that they had in their pockets. And I said, they were a coupon for extra additional cotton candy and ice cream and coffee, whatnot. And I said, use these whenever you want to make a guest happy. Or because I said, if somebody comes back with French fries that they're not happy with, the customer is always right. Change them out, always change them out. And then because you didn't get it right the first time, give them a coupon as an apology saying, sorry, we didn't get it right the first time. Please let me buy you a coffee or a cotton candy. And I thought this was great. And then I got a lot of resistance from people here that said, oh, these young people, they're going to use them for their friends. They're not going to use them in a right way. And I said, I trust these people. I said, they're smarter than I am. I'm sure they can do it. And then when we did this big seasonal first orientation, I explained the concept to the staff, and I asked them, what do you think? I want to give you this responsibility. You're not to call your supervisor anymore. You can decide. And you have these coupons that you can use whichever way you want. If you see a child walking in the park and they fall and bump their knee, give them a coupon. Say, okay, I'm sorry you fell. Go and have an ice cream. What does it cost us? 10 cents. It cost us nothing, but we make people happy. And I asked them, the staff, in this big orientation, that was the first time ever they saw me. I was presenting the whole new season. I said, what do you think? They stood up and gave me a standing ovation spontaneously. And that's the biggest part of that's like the best thing that ever happened to me, because that also proved to my permanent staff that I was on the right way. And they've been using them really well. And how it progresses is obviously that's now normal. Everybody has these coupons. Anybody can use them. I have to remind them to use them more because they do not give them away. But now they came up with, could we have a coupon where we can thank our colleagues? Because if they do exceptionally good service, we want to thank them. So first we came up with a coupon where the supervisors could give out to any staff members, and then they could give out a coffee or whatever in the park. But now the staff said, well, could we have these coupons where we can thank each other when we see that they do a great job, because maybe the supervisors don't always see this. So could we have these coupons? And that's great. And that's what we have now. So people can just they thank each other, they make sure that the guest is always happy, they take responsibility. So that's how kind of the culture progresses, where you build upon what you've done before, and then the staff is the one that wants to build up on the culture. So it's not you doing it anymore, they're doing it.
Yeah. And I think the overarching message, which is just woven throughout the whole conversation here, is the importance of building trust. Yes. That all those initiatives of, these coupons to give out to guests and getting the resistance saying, well, the staff's going to abuse it, knowing that, any abuse that program might have is a small fraction of the amount of guest service and support that it will provide, and the benefits that come from it. And then same thing from the peer-to-peer, the staff recognition for each other. So thank you for expanding on that. And I feel like this could easily be the diving board into a whole nother hour and a whole nother podcast conversation all about that. But in the meantime, Pia, if people want to reach out to you directly, or if they want to learn more about Linnenmaki, where would you send them?
They can contact me through email or LinkedIn or anyway, I would be very happy to share the ideas. I've done many podcasts before about this. The way we draw our culture, the way we build the culture is through pictures, as I've showed you before. It can be seen here, but also they're very self-explanatory. I'd love to share the ideas. I think the more we share, the more we can learn from each other, the better, and nobody should be jealous of thinking that if somebody else expands on this, it's going to be away from me. It's not away from me. It's more for me. If we all learn to treat our people better, and if we want our industry can be the front runner of making sure that we treat our people right, and people actually want to apply to amusement parks and different theme parks, that would be the greatest place to work at, because obviously amusement parks are great, and the world itself is so exciting, but we have to make sure that we treat people right, because we cannot succeed if our staff is not excited about the place at work. So I think that's important to share the ideas that we can do.
Excellent. Well, Pia, this has been a wonderful conversation. We really do appreciate your time, and that's a great message to kind of end on. And like Josh said, we could probably keep talking for a couple of more hours, but to be respectful of your time, and we'll thank you for your time today. And again, if people want to get in touch with you, I've already sent your information to somebody. You already responded to them, so that actually works. So she will respond. So just know that she's available. So Pia, again, thank you so much for your time today. And for everybody out there listening and watching, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros. Thanks for listening to the Attraction Pros podcast.
Make sure to subscribe so you can tune in when new episodes release. And even better, please leave us a review on iTunes.
For more information, visit AttractionPros.com.